They've got the whole world in their hands. 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 They've got the flowers and the trees in their hands. They've got the sun and the moon in their hands. They've got the wind and the rain in their hands. They've got the whole world in their hands. They've got everybody here in their hands. They've got everybody here in their hands. They've got you and they've got me in their hands. They've got the whole world in their hands.
Hello, my name is Graham Annable. Thanks. And I guess before I begin, I was told to remind everybody to turn off their cell phones and electronic-y devices in case it interrupts me and completely throws me off from what I'm supposed to be presenting. And I think there's some sort of survey or e-voting thing. I wasn't clear on it, but apparently you can vote on how good this goes. And if it goes really good, I guess I could be back next year talking about I'm not sure what. I was one of the co-directors on the Boxtrolls, and my plan today is to step you through some of the experiences I had on making a stop-motion film up at Laika in Portland, Oregon. Some of you may be wondering why a stop-mo guy is even here at GDC, and it's a valid question. I do have a little bit of a connection, though, to the games industry. I spent nearly 15 years working in games here in the Bay Area. I was an animator at LucasArts, involved on titles like Full Throttle, The Dig, Curse of Monkey Island, Outlaws, Obi-Wan, just to name a few. I spent some time at Telltale Games as well as the creative director there in the very, very early days when Kevin and Dan just had a tiny little space in Marin County, helping out as the creative director on games like Bone and CSI, and I'm sure some of you may have heard of Puzzle Agent. So there's a bit of a connection. Enough, I think, for me to give a speech here. During all that time I was in the games industry, I quietly was working on my own independent comic called Grickle. And it was the Grickle work that got me a job storyboarding on a film called Coraline up at Laika when they were first starting out. And that was followed by further storyboarding on another film called Paranorman. And then my life completely changed and the wild adventure called The Boxtrolls began. The Boxtrolls was based on a children's book by Alan Snow called Here Be Monsters. And Laika had bought the rights 10 years ago, about the same time that I actually began working on Coraline at the company. And my co-director, Tony Stocky, was in the background working on trying to adapt it to the screen nearly 7 years ago. So it's been a long time in the making to get to this point now. Every project is unique and bumpy in its own way. And Here Be Monsters was particularly steep in terms of the story mountain that we needed to climb to make it into a film. It's a huge book. It's over 550 pages and a cast of literally thousands. Cabbage heads, trotting badgers, talking crows, rat pirates, rabbit women, and on and on. And Alan Snow rarely gave any sort of context as to why the rat pirates ran a laundromat in the middle of the city and why the rabbit women lived underground with the Boxtrolls. There was just never any explanation for anything. And it's part of the charm of the book I mean, Alan never met a subplot he didn't like, and he never ceased to create new characters to get old characters out of a jam. So as you can imagine, making this into a film proved a pretty intense task and a lengthy one. It had a great tone, though. The book charmed all of us in terms of the tone. Tony and I would always pitch the project as Oliver Twist meets Monty Python. It just had a really awesome zaniness to it, a fantastical steampunk world that we knew would look incredible if it ever got built into tiny miniature sets and puppets. We just had to figure out how to refine down this crazy cast and make it work into 90 minutes. It took years of what Travis Knight, the head of the studio, called ruthless economy, just stripping the story down and rebuilding it and stripping it down and rebuilding it. And as we did that process over the years, we realized that the most inventive and charming out of all the characters that Alan had in the book was the Boxtrolls. It was the theme of family, coming in all shapes and sizes, and the connection between the Boxtrolls and our hero Arthur, who later became Eggs in our movie, that made the most sense to us. Everything else story-wise got tossed out, needed to go, and really couldn't come back in unless it supported that core story. Now, the story reels go through a lot of iterations, and all through that early process, you try and recognize what we call the Tentpole Sequence, the one that embodies the heart and the tone of the movie accurately. I'm going to show you an early piece that a bunch of us, myself and a few other story artists, boarded on, and it kind of sealed my fate on the Boxtrolls and became the tentpole moment for the film. This was one of my first opportunities actually to board on the project, and it was about 4 years ago. And I was really excited because I'd been doing my own personal animated shorts that I put on YouTube on the Grickle channel. And those shorts don't involve any dialogue. It's just purely sound effects and music, and extreme fun to work on as an animator. And so when Tony handed me this sequence to draw, I was thrilled because he didn't have barely any dialogue in it. Everything had to be told visually. It was just gurgles and expressions. And it had a certain Gremlins vibe to it that really was what I envisioned the project of the Boxtrolls having. And so just to give a little setup to this early sequence, at this point, at this early iteration of the story, it was about two Boxtrolls who happened to find a baby in the trash. And there's a bunch of overcomplicated stuff involving a special lens and a resizing machine and a whole bunch of other gobbledygook. But pay no mind to that. I mean, the sequence really was about this baby and these two Boxtrolls that find him.
Boxtrolls? Ah! Get out of the trash, you filthy monsters! That's my trash. Where is it? Where'd it go?
Turn around! Come on, move it! Over there! After him!
Very nice. No! Gotcha!
Thanks. Funny thing about story, this was the sequence that got, at the time, everyone really excited about making this film. Both Travis and Tony agreed that this was what the movie should be about and what the tone of it should feel like. So at that time, they threw out everything that came before this moment and everything that came after it, and we built the whole movie out from this particular moment, which of course meant that in about 3 months we cut that sequence. It's a weird thing, but it just no longer made specific sense to where the new movie had evolved to. But we had found our film, and I suddenly found myself moving from storyboarding into co-directing. Now, once the story begins to kind of coalesce and work and begins to settle down, there are other, of course, huge hurdles to deal with in making a stop-motion film. One of them is look of picture. Alan Snow's illustration style, as charming and as whimsical as it was just not going to work for a Laika stop-motion film. And so for Tony and I, it was a lucky thing when your vision can start with specific people. We had a number of artists we knew could give us the look we wanted. One of them being Nicolas de Crécy, who is this incredible French graphic novelist. And his natural sort of wonky realism gave us a great beginning point for the movie. It helped inspire the general direction for the above world and the below world. And there's nobody in the world better at drawing piles of junk than Nicolas. So he was perfect for a film about cave-dwelling box trolls. This early design that he provided of a box troll chandelier was one of the images early on that really kind of landed for the film as well. As much as you look for a tentpole sequence in story, you try to find those images in the early concepts that help solidify the whole movie into 1 or 2 images. It's just I learned very early on, it's much easier to art direct a film when you've got 1 or 2 images on a board as opposed to like 500 saying that you want all of those things in the movie. And this was one of those images that really kind of landed early on. You wanted to see this kind of object in all its tactile glory, all those warped turn-of-the-century light bulbs all clustered together. And you wanted to meet the creatures who would build such a ridiculous thing. And we really wanted to see the folks at Laika build such a ridiculous thing. So the next person who seemed perfect to extrapolate from those early de Crécy drawings was Michel Burton. Michel is a French-Canadian artist who had worked with us previously on Coraline and was a huge part of the look of the Triplets of Belleville, if anyone's seen that. He really, truly developed the shape language for the film. Steep, stretched streets in old Europe, the feeling of being trapped in a rigid, tiered city, perched high on a steep hill, twisted streets and buildings, a city full of old traditions and new, the stuff that would set and sort of mirror the themes of class and prejudice in our story. And Michel also introduced a line quality that we really, really wanted to keep in the final physical builds. This, of course, created a huge headache for the art department. They experimented with both overt and subtle ways to kind of give the right feeling. Painted on shadows, stylistic cracks in the walls, light posts and wrought ironwork that twisted and varied like Michel's ink lines. And something else we knew that was going to be challenging with the box trolls was the vast scale of the film. A lot of stop-motion films could feel like you're trapped on a small tabletop set. And they feel that way because you're trapped on a small tabletop set. We knew with this film we were going to try to break out of that and give this thing truly a big adventure film feeling to it. So Michel's early drawings gave us a peek into just how big that was going to need to be. And as the shapes and the spaces of the world became established through Michel's line work, the next stop was color. And that was the moment that production designer Paul Lassane joined the crew. And Paul had a ton of experience and was no stranger to infusing a lot of vibrancy into the sets. He worked years ago as a designer on Dick Tracy, which, if anyone remembers, it's a while ago now, but had a few colors in it. But it's a stop-motion movie, and we certainly still had our fair share of Tim Burton-esque, dark, desaturated moments in the thing. It's hard to avoid when you've got a lot of nighttime and underground sequences. But we wanted to make this film bigger and brighter than anything we'd done at Laika previously. And so any moments that allowed us to be above ground and in the sunlight, we really went for it, and Paul pushed as much color into it as he possibly could. And even with our underground scenes, I mean, Paul went to great lengths to give the Boxtroll cavern a really warm and inviting feeling to it so that it truly felt like a home for eggs and the Boxtrolls. I should mention, too, we had another great designer-illustrator, Tom McClure, working with us. And he created most of the machinery and objects you found in the Boxtroll cavern and all of Snatcher's vehicles. Tom's training was in architecture and engineering, so he could actually draw this stuff to fully function in the real world, or at least he told us it could. But I feel bad now, because we drove Tom nuts. I mean, he would design and articulate through how all these things would work, and then Tony and I would just come in and pull pieces off or add stuff on, because aesthetically we just needed something a little different. And I'm amazed that Tom kept his sanity through the whole project, because he was constantly coming into our office going, but it won't work! But it looked better. The World of Boxtrolls, with Michelle and Nicola and Tom and Paul all working so diligently and quickly, the look of the world came together actually really fast once those guys got running. And it actually put us in a bit of an odd spot, because we had the look of the picture before we actually had finalized the look of our characters. And that's a little backwards from the usual order of things. You tend to get the look of your characters first, and then help finalize the world around them to fit. And it put our character designer, Mike Smith, who's an incredible 2D animator and illustrator, into a bit of a tough spot. But to get through it, Mike ended up adopting the method that Michelle Burton had used in creating buildings for the world of Cheesebridge, starting with silhouettes. Mike started using that to build the characters. He would start with the black shape, the silhouette of the character first, and then start to layer on the lines and the textures that would go with them. And this technique actually really allowed Mike to utilize the shape language that Michelle had established with the buildings and put that into the characters. And it felt right for these characters to be inhabiting the streets and the buildings that Michelle had created in our world. Now, as the final designs of the characters began to solidify, we began to see the finished physical characters standing before us. They moved from 2D drawings to the sculpts to fully functioning puppets. And it just so happens I have a few with me. This is the moment where I drop one. So I got shoe, eggs, and fish here. And these are the actual puppets that were used in the film. And for the most part, these puppets at Laika are nearly the same as was made for King Kong back in 1933. I mean, there hasn't been a huge change in how things are done in stop motion. Inside is a metal armature, and wrapped around that armature is a clay, or in this case, silicone body. And then actual clothing for guys like Eggs who need it, and hair and fur added on top of that. And I don't know if it's because we're based in Portland, but in this particular film, most of the hair used in it was made from hemp. Take from that what you will. A lot of the clothing, if you get a chance to see these up close maybe later, is incredibly articulate. Our costume department is unbelievable, run by Deborah Cook. And they do their utmost best to sort of hide the scale of our film. So in this movie, we ended up using a lot of laser cutting to help sort of give the fabric the right level and scale of stitch so that it doesn't give away the scale of the actual puppets. It's pretty incredible. And speaking of scale, something that I learned I hadn't realized. I'd worked on Coraline and Paranorman as a story artist and sort of presumed I knew what went into making a stop-motion film, but there was so much more when I ended up in the co-director role that was always surprising to learn. Eggs, our main character, stands about 9 inches tall. And when you create a stop-motion feature, you figure out obviously who your main character is, and his scale kind of dictates, or his or her scale dictates for the entire rest of the film how big the movie needs to be. And Eggs needs to be built at an optimal size for the animators to use. So his 9 inches height basically dictated the size and the scale of our buildings, our vehicles. Everybody else had to sort of fit into Eggs' world. And it makes sense, because he's the main character. He's going to be in the most shots. He's going to be used by the most animators. So everything sort of builds out from him. From the smallest Boxtrolls to the biggest mecha drill machinery. It's funny, initially the puppet department was so stoked when they learned that the Boxtrolls had been greenlit, because we were going to make a movie that was based around characters who wore huge boxes. And for them, it was exciting because huge boxes means they could hide all manner of mechanics and crap underneath and not have to deal with a lot of the logistical issues they typically do. It was going to be like a total cakewalk for them. But as we continuously kept adding gags and business to the storyline, it became apparent that there was never going to be enough space inside those boxes to neatly hide all the mechanics and things we wanted the Boxtrolls to do. So what started out as a walk in the park for the department soon became a marathon of endless innovation and trickery to get the boxes to do everything we demanded they do. So they suddenly were no longer stoked about the Boxtrolls quite the way they were at the beginning. Now, as the Boxtrolls came together, we also began to experiment with how they'd move. And at first, Tony and I had got really excited with the idea of like all this elaborate animalistic sort of alien behaviors that they could have. We had them doing all kinds of strange orangutan walks mixed with movements from birds, and all manner and variety of creatures were sort of developed into these things. And it was really fun, but it ultimately was getting in the way. And it was soon clear that these guys were plenty weird enough without layering on a whole new movement system to them. And so we were overcomplicating them, and simpler is always truly better. Let the personalities come out, and rather than focusing too much on the elaborate movement. So I actually brought with me today a couple of really early animation tests for you to get a sense of just some of the testing and look at these characters that they go through. This was an early test for the box. And at the very beginning stages, it's a movie about trolls that wear cardboard boxes. So we actually were using cardboard. And we quickly realized the cardboard was never going to last throughout the whole 18 months of the shoot. So we had to switch to more silicone-based, but cardboard-looking boxes. And this is a glimpse at some of sort of the interior mechanics and the beginnings of what we settled on for the movement. But it was these moments where it was just simply about the character and how timid and cautious these creatures were that it began to really land that that's where we should be going with the movement. So Fish and Shoe were our main Boxtrolls to develop, and their initial silhouettes were informed by the story department's early drawings, but their personalities took a while to percolate. Fish, Egg's surrogate father, had to have a more responsible, serious, emotional side, as well as being a tool-obsessed weirdo like the rest of the Boxtrolls. And Mike Smith put him on style and developed his expressions as story developed their performances. And now, during the same time, voice records began to happen. And initially, much like the overthought animation and movement that Tony and I had conceived, we'd also thought it'd be really cool and clever to try to come up with a whole actual specific Boxtroll language. I mean, we were super nerding out in the early days. And we'd imagined we'd probably be selling Boxtroll dictionaries at the end of all of this when the movie came out. But thankfully, we smartly hired Dee Baker and Steve Bloom to do the voices of both Fish and Shoe. And Dee was Fish and Steve was Shoe. And within one session, it was clear that our language was way overthought and too complex, and it just didn't fit the simplicity of what the Boxtrolls needed to be for the film. And so both Dee and Steve, with all their vast experience doing a ton of alien voices and all manner of stuff, I mean, they've been in video games, movies, TV, everything. They've done, I think, most of the creatures you've probably listened to in the last 20 years from Hollywood. They were instrumental in helping us work out a much more stripped-back, emotive soundscape for the trolls. It was, at a level that you could understand what they were getting at, but you weren't lost in a myriad of Klingon-esque words and odd phrases. Part human, part Eastern European frog gurgles. It was a little sort of in that territory. Shoe's design came a little more naturally to Mike Smith, a self-obsessive Big Brother character with a bit more of a one-track mind than Fish. And Steve Bloom developed his voice and gave him every bit as much flavor as Dee's Fish had. One of the unique things we do at Laika that is certainly unlike the days of King Kong is creating expressions for our puppets using 3D printers. Let's see if I can do this without destroying them. So these faces are printed out from a 3D printer. I think Eggs had close to 15,000 pieces of face pieces created for the film, which gave him somewhere in the range of 1.4 million possible expressions. This is a full face. Typically, for most of the shots in the film, they're split from the brow and the mouth. So there's all kinds of, obviously, different combinations you can use to create the different expressions. But it is a pretty crazy process. And definitely the one thing that is very different from the days of King Kong. I've got a clip here, because every time I try to explain this process, I start losing myself in technical terms that I don't even fully understand. So I brought a clip with me from our RP department I'll let the experts clarify it a little better than I can.
They don't make you. You make you.
We knew from Paranorman that we had this color printing process that worked really well, but it worked well to produce some naturalistic skin tones. And now looking at these really vibrant sort of theatrical paint jobs that the directors wanted on Boxtrolls, we were sort of scratching your head saying, well, in theory the machines can do it, but we don't really know if they can do it. And maybe they can do it once, but are they going to be repeatable? If you get a beautiful paint job, how is that paint job going to animate? And we came up with a way to do it. It worked really well.
Oh, my little angel, my weird little angel.
Looking at how we were able to improve the process on Paranorman and then looking at the script of Boxtrolls and these really specialty story moments, we needed to have something unique. And Allergy Snatcher is a perfect example of that.
Isn't this nice?
His face has so much swollen weirdness to it that having him say a line of dialogue, you get so much follow-through with his cheeks and his lips.
Something on the choicest cheeses.
That we learned very early on that there was no way that we could try to recycle these poses.
Stand back, peasants. You don't touch your king.
So what we decided to do was tackle every single one of Allergy Snatcher's shots as its own unique animation. And then we would have to print out those faces. Faces, they were so big, we were only able to print 12 faces in 12 hours.
And how many can you usually do in 12 hours?
Probably 150 of, like, eggs, as an example.
See? You're not like them.
You have no idea that this thing that you're watching, this creature, is not real because of the amount of nuance and subtlety and naturalism that we were able to put into these faces. They feel like they're really little creatures with skin and movable muscles and volume change, and when you pick them up and you tap on their faces, they're just a hard plaster that isn't movable, but through replacement animation, you get some really lovely, smooth animation.
Nice.
So it's kind of an insane process. In creating these faces, one of the weirdest steps, at least to me, for the directors, is we have a separate phase of it called the play blast. And it's where we have to sign off on the facial performances up front, sometimes months in advance of when the actual shot will be animated on the set. The RP department essentially pastes digital versions of the faces they've created in Maya over top of the story reel so that everyone can kind of agree upon the final faces that are going to be used on set. And so once we agree that those faces that we've seen in the story reel are working, they hit the almighty print button on the 3D printer, and months later, those faces are actually used on the set. I got an example of an early sequence here that is a Play Blast version. It creates an odd setting. So, like all things in stop motion, it creates a situation where you got to have a lot of commitment up front. There's a moment in there, I don't know if you noticed, but as Fish walks away from Shu, his whole face suddenly contorts and moves because the animator was like, hey, I want to, at that point, have him rub his nose. But we won't know for a couple of months whether that rubbing of the nose is actually going to work out okay. So there's a certain amount of scariness to almost everything we do in stop motion, where you just have to commit fully early on and hope that it's all going to come together when it's out there on that set. So once a play blast is okayed by the directors, they print those faces, and then the animator, weeks or months later, carries a tray of these selected faces out to his set. And then he applies them frame by frame as he or she animates the full puppet body. And hopefully, the results end up something like this. A visit to Laika Studios is a little like walking onto an old Hollywood movie set in some respects. There's lighting gear everywhere, there's sawing and drilling and all manner of heavy equipment and noise coming from huge workshops. There's a costume department, there's sewing and stitching, there's puppets being built, and there's paint being applied everywhere. But interspersed within all those scenes of old school movie magic are rooms filled with glowing computers and space-age printers. And the studio really is a place that Travis likes to call, or likes to say, is made up of futurists and Luddites who share a parking lot and battle it out on a daily basis to make our films come alive. I've got a little clip here that kind of gives you a peek of some of the magic that happens daily on a production like The Boxtrolls.
There's nothing that exists before we start on one of these films. Every single thing that you see has got to be designed and built by hand.
What?
You don't get anything for free in stop motion. We've really got to plan out every single element.
And that goes as far as the fire and the smoke and water and all the natural elements that you see on screen.
Tell me everything!
As an art director, it's awesome. I mean, how often do you get to create everything? I mean, that's an incredible sense of power.
One of the things that's incredibly difficult to do in stop motion film is bring the environments to life in a believable way. And it's something that was very important for us in this film to have that level of atmosphere.
We talked about what's water going to look like, what's the destruction, what's dust going to look like, what are the materials that we would use to create these images, and that's where we start.
You can't change nature.
We created this entire sewer system with flowing water and dripping water out of just plastic and glass.
What we have behind me is a sheet of glass that has ripples in it, and it's made from shower glass. And that's passing from left to right, and that's giving us our flow. And then what we've done is we've created a little nest of mirrors and wires and bits of blue masking tape. And so what we're seeing is we're seeing the effect of the rippled glass passing over those wires and mirrors. And that's given us the illusion of the highlights above ground.
How curious, how peculiar.
The 24, 25 different kinds of weeds that we have growing in Cheesebridge are all specific weeds, but yet they're sort of stylized in a way that puts them into our world, which I think is the important thing.
A new species, never seen before.
For the fire, we did a lot of early tests on with using cheesecloth. Our rigging department did this amazing series of flames and this amazing fire out of just using suspended upside down cheesecloth hit with kind of this orangish yellowish light, and it looked incredible.
The attraction to making like natural elements is partially the challenge of taking on nature. You just become more appreciative of like the things you take for granted by delving so much deeper into the subject matter.
It's the little moments.
And when you've got it, you just feel like you're kind of neck and neck with nature. There's quite an empowering feeling about trying to emulate nature.
Now, that clip kind of gives the impression that everything in the movie was a practical effect done by the Luddites. And it is so not true. The Futurists played a huge role in this as well. I mean, at their core, Laika films are stop motion. Every shot begins with a real puppet on a real set. And as much as we want to bring the medium forward into the modern world, we never want to lose sight of what makes this type of animation so special. And we knew the scale and complexity of the Boxtrolls early on was going to make this film a true hybrid. We'd learned a lot of lessons in the making of Coraline and Paranorman that put us in a unique position to utilize the VFX department in a way we'd never done before at Laika. There's almost no shot in the film that doesn't have some form of CG applied to it, whether it's as simple as a seam removal on a puppet's face or as huge as putting in an entire city backdrop. I've got with me today some shot breakdowns from our rooftop chase sequence. And these will certainly give you a much clearer, better idea of how extensive, in certain sequences, the VFX help can be. So it starts off with puppets in a set. The rigs get removed. The city gets dropped into the background. You have atmosphere, smoke from, chimney, buildings, chimney smoke, more atmosphere in front of the camera. A whole city again. Again, puppets and set, and then a lot of the trickery gets put into this. I never realized making this film how much we had to focus on, or how often it would happen that you could see up Boxtrolls' boxes. which became a huge issue. We were constantly darkening and sort of adding, the puppet department was always adding a little bit of black velvet under there to kind of help obscure things. I had no idea we'd have so many times where you could actually see up their box. A little awkward. That sequence is a pretty extreme example of how heavily we can lean on the VFX department, but again, neither Tony and I were purists in any way, shape, or form with stop motion. We just wanted to create a movie that felt as big as it possibly could, while still retaining that charm and that uniqueness that stop motion has. The puppets are real, the sets are real, everything that the puppets actually touch or interact with is always real, but wherever else we can help expand that world and create a fantastical landscape, we always would go to the VFX guys to help create it. And I think watching what they did on this film and knowing what they've done on Coraline and Paranorman, being a VFX crew inside a stop motion house like Laika is a pretty tricky thing, because all three of those films, the worlds are very stylized and not in a hyper-realistic kind of way. So you never can really borrow or build upon the water, smoke, or atmosphere that you developed for one film that you used in the last film. The effects all have to always stay within the style of each specific film, indistinguishable from the physical components. Now, that rooftop sequence was pretty complicated, a lot of camera movement and a lot of VFX help. And we figured, looking at our story reels, that the third act battle was going to be the most challenging to create. It contained our villain Snatcher driving a giant steampunk mecha drill, which stood about 5 feet tall, weighed over 80 pounds, was the largest puppet we've ever built at the studio. And it's just destroying our largest set, the Market Square, in a chaotic, all hell broken loose, end-of-the-world type battle sequence. So surely that was going to be our toughest and most expensive sequence to create. Well, it wasn't. The toughest sequence by far in the film to create was Ballroom Dancing. Here's some time-lapse of one of our animators, Jan Moss, doing a little bit of the dance stuff between Eggs and Winnie. Oh, I should forewarn you that the sets sometimes get pretty hot in the summer, so you may see a little more flesh than you're expecting to with Jan. He likes to work freely. Oh, there it is. Gets him in the zone. So Ballroom Dancing. Ballroom Dancing nearly brought the studio to its knees. All through the production, we have what we call breakdown meetings. And it's where the heads of all the departments gather together to discuss each sequence. And we go shot by shot, and the departments all duke it out over who's going to do what and how it's going to be done. And these meetings are always supplied with coffee and cookies and all manner of salty snacks. And the room is almost always really buzzing with a lot of energy and a lot of noise as everybody's anticipating all the work we're going to have to figure out. When Tony and I walked into the ballroom breakdown meeting, it was completely silent. Nobody spoke a word. No one would even make eye contact with us as we sat down in our chairs. Everyone just quietly leafed through the packets and looked at each other nervously. So it was at that moment that Tony and I realized that maybe we'd stepped off into the deep end of the pool in the world of stop motion. And it was deep. It involved all the departments to their absolute fullest. We ended up hiring choreographers from the Portland Ballet Company who came out to the studio with their whole troupe and recreated, well, actually for the first time, created the whole choreography of the waltz and the dance. And it was all filmed and analyzed by our animators and our camera crew. We had to get our composer involved really early on to actually write the waltz. Not only write the waltz, but figure out the emotional score that he was going to have to weave into it. The puppet department had to engineer specific and special dresses just for the sequence so that the flow of them all would operate right. And it really pushed the limits of integration between the VFX department and the practical department. They had to figure out ways to interweave all the VFX puppets with all the practical puppets on a level that we'd just never approached before. It took all 18 months of our shooting schedule to create a little less than 2 minutes of actual dance footage. So it was kind of harrowing. But in the end, it was all worth it, or at least I think so. Some of the crew may still have differing opinions on that. But I think it was all worth it because it ended up looking like this sequence did.
There you are.
We have to get to your father.
You can't just cut through. We dance.
Well, what?
Like this. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Just make a box.
You made me get out of my box.
With your feet, silly. That's it, Eggs. You're dancing.
Snatcher is here.
Who? Where?
My turn, madam.
Frou-frou.
Winnie!
Who? Uh-oh. Eggs, look
What is going on here?
One thing I learned as director on this film is that stop motion really is like no other form of animation. All animation is a pain in the butt to create, but I think stop motion kind of takes the cake. 2D and CG animation tend to be more of an iterative process. You build a performance and you keep combing through it, removing frames or drawings as the shot gets honed. You sit, hopefully, with the director throughout all of this, and in a sense, build it together, checking in with each other often. Stop motion is not quite like that. It's apparently combined all the worst aspects of live action and animation and given you none of the benefits. There's no extra coverage, there's no early pencil tests, there's no Control-Z. I'd never anticipated the intensity of animator launches. And launches are when, as a director, you sit with the animator in the edit suite and go over the shot he or she is going to animate. And all the planning you've done for months, if not years, comes down to that conversation with the animator. In stop motion, you sometimes get a block and a rehearsal before you do that final shot. And the block is usually incredibly crude, shot on 12s or more, and is almost more for the benefit of the lighting and camera crew than it is for the animator. And rehearsal is done on 4s or 2s. And it gives you a slightly muddy look at what might be the final performance for the shot. And then you do the final shot. And so the launch is when you've hopefully communicated everything accurately, left no stone unturned. And it's incredibly stressful as a director, because if you don't get it all nailed in that moment, the animator then gets up, walks out that door to the set, and is going to create the shot that you'll live with forevermore in the film. It's a bit more, I think, like theater, I imagine. You're giving as much direction and information as you can to the actor-animator, and then they get pushed out on stage, and they do what they're going to do, a true performance. The animation shooting schedule, both Tony and I have described it as essentially 18 months of opening nights. It's terrifying, but amazing. And as insane as it all is, creating a stop-motion movie, there is no denying that it does hold a unique quality to the final look, a certain dreamlike feeling that truly is special. Real objects on real light. I don't know what it is, but everybody gravitates to it. I think there's something in our DNA, I guess, as kids playing with dolls. You just can't get away from it. And when you see these things physically in front of you, it's just, I don't know, there's nothing quite like it. And I do find that in a world right now where there are so many CG animated films, it's kind of comical that Laika seems to offer something new by doing something so old. I've got one last clip to show you, and I think it really showcases the specialness of the craft and the performance aspect of it. I kind of wish we had a whole entire version of the movie like this.
Little boxes all the same. There's a pink one and a green one and a blue one and a yellow one, and they're all made out of ticky-tacky and they all look just the same. And the people in the houses learned their trade, 'cause they were put in boxes and they came out all the same. They're white hats and red hats and button-up businessmen. They're all made out of ticky-tacky and they all look just the same.
That's all I got. I don't know if folks have some questions. I think we have a little bit of time left in here, so sure.
It's more of a technical question, but how do you manage to change all the faces without moving all the rest of the body? Because I tried stop motion before, and it's really, really hard to move one part without moving everything else.
There is a lot of effort and energy and thinking put into how tightly tensioned the puppets are. So they hold those poses pretty great. I mean, these guys are all super posable, articulate, but they'll hold those positions. They also get screwed into the ground. They drill holes in the set to like solidify them right to the set. It's actually one of the most disturbing things to watch because there's so much effort put into making these beautiful, beautiful sets. And then an animator shows up with a drill and starts going boom, 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 just to screw in his puppet. So they're held, as tightly as possible. And then the faces, the replacement faces, incredibly strong magnets, and they lock those things into place. There's still inevitably a little shift here and there, and that's what we have a VFX department for. But most of the time, it's pretty solid.
And didn't you get lost with all these faces? Because you said there were so many.
Yeah, there's like thousands and thousands. But there's a whole group of people within the studio that are the face librarians, and they track and mark. Well, you can't see it from here, but inside these faces is a serialized number, cataloging it all, and they have these huge rooms just full of trays and trays and trays of faces, and they know and can track where each face is on every day. Another thing that was just mind-blowing in terms of learning stuff on stop motion was, for the first time in my life as an artist, I actually felt really sorry for our production department. Because scheduling a stop motion film is ridiculous, because you're always dealing with finite resources. You can't download another eggs. You can't just magically bring up another set. There is only so many sets and only so many puppets, and those people have this massive room where everything is mapped out, where each set's going to be on which day through the entire 18 months. And of course, nothing goes to plan. And so anytime an animator starts to go over on a shot, suddenly they've got to, like Dominoes, readjust the whole shooting schedule just to make sure we can still accommodate everybody involved.
Okay. Can I take a picture of...
What's that?
Can I take a picture?
I was going to say, actually, after questions, if people want to come up and take pictures, totally fine. Yeah. But maybe just wait until...
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome.
I was curious, did you have any disasters during the shoot? Did anyone drop a box of faces or something like that?
That happened on Coraline, but I don't think anybody smashed faces on the Boxtrolls. I guess the animators got a little better about placing them. Probably the worst accident I can think of was one of our animators, Ludo. Another disturbing thing to watch is eye movement on the puppets. The animators all use X-Acto blades to move the eyes. It's the best way to kind of just gently nudge them whichever way you need them. But it's really, it's kind of disturbing to watch them jam an X-Acto blade into the puppet's face and his eye and sort of move it around. Ludo, I guess, had left his X-Acto blade in a weird way on his work table, almost actually dropped a puppet, went to grab it, backed up, suddenly looked, and there was the X-Acto blade sticking out of his abdomen. So that was maybe our worst accident that I can think of.
Hi, great talk, by the way.
Oh, thanks.
When you print the faces, do they come with the color already made, or you have to paint it by hand?
On the Boxtrolls, fully colored in the printer. And it's been an evolving process. On Coraline, there was no color. We still had to hand paint. And of course, that limited how many faces and how complex the design could be. And then on Paranorman, we started to get some color in the faces. And that started to open up the world to complexity. But on the Boxtrolls, we really went for broke. As you may have remembered in that clip, Brian Maclean, head of the department, I think we scared him with how much color we put on their faces, because we were told we could just go for broke in terms of the design. And we had such an elaborate, detailed world, we wanted their faces to feel elaborate and detailed as well. And fully colored, though, in the printer.
Oh, thank you.
You're welcome.
I think Laika is just doing amazing creative work in animation. Thanks. And one thing that impresses me so much is from a story perspective, how bold the themes are of all three films. And so I just wanted to hear more about kind of the internal philosophy as far as story goes.
So much of that credit has to go to Travis Knight, who runs the studio. I mean, we all recognize we're in a pretty unique situation up there. We're far enough away from Hollywood, and we, as an artist, really get to make the movies we want to see. Stop motion doesn't really allow for a lot of focus testing and all the rest of it because you can't go back and change things. And Travis's philosophy and the kinds of films that he wants to see Laika do are ones that, in his mind, harken back more to the early days of classic Disney, you know, Bambi and Pinocchio. And if you look back at those films got pretty darn dark. And you need those dark moments to have those light moments to work. And, you know, you want a very dynamic experience emotionally when you watch a film. And so we've always kind of been committed to the idea that we would make movies that were a little more challenging for kids and hopefully, you know, fully fleshed out for adults as well. And it's really just about us sort of pleasing ourselves with the kind of movies we want to watch.
Hi. Sorry, that's going to be the last question. We're out of time.
Oh, okay.
If there's still questions, you guys can go to the room South 300 and speak to the speaker in the wrap-up room.
Okay. Thanks, everybody.